hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good wherever you are, and welcome to this CGIAR staff webinar. If you would like to hear today's webinar in Spanish, please go ahead and hit the interpretation button that is at the bottom of your screen. For today, Kundavi, Elwin, and I are being joined by a number of colleagues who have been contributing to the One CGIAR transformation across portfolio design, institutional strategy and systems, as well as resource mobilization, communications, and advocacy. So we're excited to have a number of new speakers with us today, and we will introduce them at various points during today's discussion. Colleagues, we have received lots of questions in advance of this session, and we really appreciate that. We appreciate your continued engagement and reaching out like that. We will try to provide updates that will address many of those questions that we have received in advance. But we also welcome the opportunity for you to submit additional questions today live in the question and answer function, the Q&A function, the button at the bottom of your screen. And in addition, we're hoping to try something new today. Many of you have asked that we make these sessions a little more interactive, and we agree. But there are some limitations to what we can do with this number of participants. However, today we've arranged that if you would like to ask your question verbally rather than in writing, we can try to bring you in and enable your camera and microphone. If you'd like to do that, please add the words "on camera" in your question in the Q&A space, and we will try to accommodate as many of those questions as possible. During today's session, we will also take a couple of interactive polls, and to participate in those, as you have done before, you'll be visiting www.menti.com, MENTI.com on your computer or phone, and there will be a code and this web address on screen when the time comes for that. Finally, the last bit of housekeeping is that today's session is being recorded, and the recording will be made available on the CGIAR website within the coming days for any colleagues who were not able to join us and attend. If you are having any technical difficulties during this webinar, please write to events@cgiar.org. So, but before we launch into the presentations, let's begin with the first poll. On the next slide, please. In these challenging times, we want to know what everyone is trying to do to take care of our well-being. This is a very prolonged challenge that we are facing. So let us know, what are some of your activities, your practices, habits, hobbies that you are pursuing in order to enhance your well-being during these difficult times? And again, to respond to the poll, use your computer or phone to go to menti.com on your screen, click in the code, and then you can go ahead and fill in some of your answers. And Kundavi, Ellen, and I can share some of the things that we have been doing to try to enhance our well-being in these times. And I personally really enjoy getting outside for walks and hikes with my husband, a little bit of yoga. We've had lots of interesting responses with pets. I personally have 2 rescue cats. And we're seeing quite a lot of this good exercise and companionship. Kundavi, Elwin, care to share?
Yeah, let me just jump in. Again, sometimes I disconnect from this real world and world of food systems by reading about SpaceX, Mars ingenuity, and dark matter and all that. Gets me out of this food systems world now and then.
Straight out of this world.
I sort of half connect by having a lot of walking meetings where I walk around my neighborhood talking. My neighbors must think I'm mad because I'm out there, it seems like half the time. The other thing, I discovered this great app, which I won't market here, which has all kinds of yoga classes on it. And I'm trying to do that, which is a really good way to switch off.
Wonderful. It's great to see all the other ideas. I saw chocolate pop up a moment ago that I think is a cure-all. Personally, I'm a big believer in chocolate, but a great set of thoughts. And it's wonderful to see so many interests and so many ways in which we can take care of ourselves, even as we're trying to take care of smallholder farmers. So colleagues, in terms of taking care, we really wanted to begin by also taking a moment to recognize the continued just tremendous challenges that we're facing due to COVID-19. We're seeing in some cases very encouraging progress on vaccinations, with some countries lifting travel restrictions, but for many key CGIAR locations and partner countries, the situation is probably more challenging than at any other previous time over the past year. In particular, with regard to India, which has been particularly hard hit in these past few weeks, we're preparing a CGIAR-wide statement of solidarity and support and stand ready to deploy our global capabilities and expertise to assist India in any way we can in the recovery from the pandemic. We're also arranging, I believe it's tomorrow, a meeting across our staff leadership in India, again, just to coordinate in whatever way we can for the well-being of our staff and families and any contribution we can make to communities and to the country. So we remain very deeply grateful for the coordinated and collaborative way in which leaders across the CG and our COVID-19 focal points have responded, as well as our CGIAR research responses to the pandemic. So with thanks to the focal points and our GDI function, I also wanted to take this opportunity to remind you of the counseling service and other tools and resources that are available to us that we shared in the previous newsletter just last week. Please do take advantage of those resources if they can be of any use to you at all. Before moving then directly on to today's updates, there are a few frequently asked questions that do keep coming up in all of our discussions. And so let me speak very briefly to those before then moving through our presentations. Perhaps our most frequent, understandably, our most frequently asked questions are about what the CGIAR reforms mean for professional growth, opportunity, security, etc. And I think it's important for us to remember as we move into these transitions that part of what is tremendously exciting here is that the knitting together of CG into one vast system is really an opportunity to bring together our incredibly diverse and deeply talented CGIAR staff. And we're really hoping that this will help open up new career opportunities, new networks of professionals, new exchanges of ideas across the system. And this is a growth exercise, the reforms. So we are hoping that we will grow, that everyone will come with us, and that this new way of working will provide that much more dynamism and exposure and opportunity for people professionally. Some ask how they can contribute during the transition, and so many of you are contributing already, from the design working groups, the technical teams, and the initiative design teams on the portfolio, to the communities of practice who are working very hard to restructure our institutional systems, to the network of resource management and advocacy and comms who are really pulling together the narrative of our new structure and helping us to introduce ourselves, reintroduce ourselves as one CG. So continuing in those engagements, continuing to come to these seminars, continuing to support your colleagues who may be involved in some of these initiatives in some way. Virtually everyone in the system is really involved and committed and contributing. So we thank you very much. We also have been hearing questions about how our gender diversity and inclusion commitments will be honored in terms of this transition to one CGIAR. And we really just want to reconfirm a strong commitment in that regard. Part of what is part of any transformation and reform like the one that we are in at the moment requires a change in culture as well, and a change in mindset as we reorient ourselves to the new structure. And part of this will be a recommitment to our values for GDI. So we will see that, we hope, across the new standardized and harmonized policies that we're bringing forward in the rounds of recruitments that we have moving forward. And very importantly, simply in the way that we work and work with one another. So again, this bringing together of staff into these larger global communities. We expect that these communities will be really very much infused with a sense of value for the diversity that we all bring and respect for that. Let us go on though into more specific updates. What we will be doing, as we often do, is each one of the three of us from the ENT, but today with very special guest speakers, we'll be reviewing the areas of work that each of us take the lead on. So I'll turn now to Elwyn, who will update us on the integrated operational structure and the great progress that we are making there. And Elwyn will introduce you to today's speakers as well. Thank you, Elwyn.
Thank you, Claudia. Today I'm really happy to be joined by Carla Lazat, who's Director of People and Organizational Development at SIP, and also Michael Gerber, who's Chief Operating Officer at ILRI. So I'll be bringing them into the discussion and also into the Q&A. But maybe let me just say something in starting on overall. Since we last had the series of staff calls a couple of months ago, there's been huge progress. When we last spoke to you in this forum, we'd just gone through the council meeting where we got this ringing endorsement for the operational structure and a lot of encouragement to really now just get on with it and do it. Don't drag it out. And since then, we've worked hard with many people across the system to develop a transition plan that we believe is the right way to go about this. It's a high-level transition plan. It's going to evolve over time. And let me just say let me discuss the key elements. And that's what this slide tries to capture. In terms of the timing of things, on the left-hand side, what we're really doing now and focusing on is filling key managerial roles of that new structure and filling and finding roles where we believe that directors general can also fill those roles alongside their DG role, which will itself change over time. And we're going through a process right now with DGs that is going very well. All have agreed in principle to filling one of the 10 global director roles or one of the 6 regional director roles, which is just great because it gives us that business continuity and it gives us that experience and leadership that we're going to need to get behind this new structure. We're at the same time advertising for the 4 global director roles in institutional strategy and systems, and we've also got 2 regional director roles which are about to go out for advertisement as well. So we're aiming to fill these positions very quickly. At the same time, we're defining the broad transition framing, which I'm talking about now, and we've had a discussion with the system board about that and many others. And we're going through a process of staff affiliations across all staff of CGIAR, so we can be clear that everyone has a home in this new structure. And I'll say a bit more about that in a moment. What we then aim to get to is, for the second half of this year, is much more detailed planning about how we're going to make this transition and how can we refine the structure, because that structure was set out relatively broadly in the council paper and the system board paper. We need to go into more detail. We also need to shift reporting lines incrementally to this new leadership. And I'll come back to that too. From January next year, we aim to have the science groups fully operational and have the supporting environment around corporate services and resource mobilization, communications, etc., in place to support those new science groups to succeed from the moment they start off delivering the new portfolio. What will this take? And now I'll go to the right-hand side of the slide. And by the way, please ask questions. I'd like to see some questions pop up on the screen. If there's anything I'm saying where it provokes a question, please jot it down because we'd like to be able to refer to those. So on the right-hand side, we really need to help the leadership of these global groups, or the global directors, the senior directors, to really succeed. And that's going to take an authorizing environment, which we're working with boards about, in terms of decision-making protocols, where we're going to have to shift some of those. We're going to need new policies that are coherent across CGIAR, at least the minimum to start on the one CGIAR pathway right now, and certainly in the science groups next year, and those can evolve over time. Secondly, we're going to need to switch to the new budget around the operational structure from the 1st of January next year. We discussed this and actually debated it in some depth. That's 8 months away. We feel we can do this. That's a big transition. It's a huge transition. We actually felt that if we delayed that another year to the next budget cycle, could have really promoted a lot of confusion and chaos over next year, because this new leadership wouldn't have power over the most important thing, which is the funding. Secondly, thirdly, on reporting lines, again, this has been a subject of great discussion. We would like to switch reporting lines to operational reporting lines to this leadership group as soon as possible. That will be hopefully mid-year for the heads of corporate service functions in centers into these new global directors in institutional strategy and systems. So to give an example, it would mean that we hope in June and July, we would have the heads of, for example, IT in centers change their formal reporting line, their operational reporting line to the Global Digital Services Director. But their client would be the center, and they would carry on serving the center, but also that would evolve into them being part of that new team that's building the global IT services, and they would incrementally shift their efforts in towards serving that new operational structure. And that will happen over HR and other services too. They also would be looking at accountabilities for representing one CGIAR to shift to that team, and also fundraising and coordination and communication accountability. We really appreciate how much work this is for everyone. And we, as I've said, we looked at whether we could phase this over many more years. But to be honest, it just seemed like we would be essentially prolonging uncertainty and making the start of this thing to be a bit of a flat start, because we would be not empowering this new operational structure to succeed. So let's go on to the next slide. Now, a very immediate thing that everyone will be involved in one way or another is the affiliations. Now, we're using that word affiliation. It doesn't mean this is the final destination. There'll be some reporting line changes. But we wanted it to make it clear that everyone is part of this new structure. And in one of these 10 global groups, or one of the 6 regional groups. And on that, I wonder, actually, you probably heard enough from me already. Let me turn to my colleagues. Perhaps, Carla, you can say something about the staff affiliation exercise, and I'll pick it up from you.
Thank you, Elwin. And as you said, the affiliation is an evolving conversation that started a few months back, but it will continue. It, in my view, it has been managed respectfully and in the most collaborative manner. And the HR community of practice has been working closely with TPMU, assessing and providing inputs and feedback on the process. So within our centers, we've had focal points that have been appointed. And for example, in my center, the Chief Financial Administration Officer and myself have led the effort and ensured that different angles were assessed on how best to provide that information. It's new, it was new to us. So, but the senior leaders are the ones that have been consulted on the preference of those decisions into the future. And the affiliation data that has been presented has been at a team level. But we are now preparing for those more individual conversations in the upcoming months. So this is very much, as I said, an evolving process. I would also like to acknowledge that this topic has brought much discomfort and stress to staff. And we are aware of that. So we think that through our focal points and through the feedback loops, we're ensuring that all answers and points of view are taken into account. And very much related to this topic is also the change management efforts that will accompany this process, as well as the whole journey. The last thing I would say on this part is that to remind staff that the affiliation is more an exercise of coming together and building of our strengths than anything else. And everybody will have a role to play. So back to you, Elwin. Thank you.
Thank you, Carla. And just to add that the change of reporting lines is something that is it flows to some extent from the staff affiliation, but it's a different exercise. And what that will mainly involve is the senior staff across the centers. And again, not to pick on IT, but since I've been having recent conversations on that, we could imagine that, for example, if the director of IT's reporting line changes into the global director of digital services, then all the staff reporting to that IT director, their reporting lines wouldn't change, right? They would be part of this global group now, providing what we expect to be absolutely fantastic global services, which they'll be able to do as they're able to pool their skills, their resources, and our investment opportunity. So it really, the change of reporting line would probably largely be for those upper and middle managers across centers, and not for all staff directly. That would be too disruptive and frankly unnecessary. If I could now turn to the next slide, which is to say a bit more about institutional strategy and systems. Please, Michael, let's bring you in here.
Thanks, Ellen, for bringing me in on this. I guess what I just wanted to touch on is a little bit about how do all staff across the CG connect with the mission that we have, and more specifically, how do the people connected with the institutional strategies and systems, how do we contribute to the CG mission? And I think it's important for us all to realize we're all strategic partners. We're all helping to deliver impact and results across the CG. And so we do play, an integral role in doing this. And we feel like as we're designing this, that we will be able to really allow staff to have build these integrated teams across all the staff that will allow for both contributions to the impact of the CG, but also for professional and individual growth. I think we talk a lot, or there is talk about, what shape of skills do you have? Do you have I-shaped skills or T-shaped skills? And we really believe that through this integration with IS&S, we're going to be able to develop these T-shaped skills across all of our staff that really have the depth in maybe individual areas, but also the breadth that reaches across multiple countries, multiple areas, and really be able to help develop people professionally. And again, I mean, what we're looking for is how do we streamline our services that we provide to both the research groups, but also the RM and communications and advocacy. How do we provide this high quality, effective, efficient services to everybody, and how do we pull it all together? So it is really exciting as we look to form this. How do we pull the best practices across all the centers and best practices globally? So thanks, Ellen, over to you.
Thank you, Michael, and for both of all your work on this. I just picking up on some questions. One from Virginia on for the global roles being advertised, where internal staff first considered, or was a decision to advertise, if not filled by a DG? So what we decided was that if there were not a position where we would do something, where we would place a DG, or DG would choose to be placed, because of the speed required to move forward and to get absolutely the best possible candidates, we've advertised both internally and externally at the same time. And we're absolutely encouraging strong, skilled staff within the system to go for those roles. And we are planning to go through a very rigorous but fast process to assess candidates and interview and take decisions, because it's critical that we have these global directors in place to be able to help us build this thing and build it in a really collaborative way. I just can't wait for those global directors to be holding staff calls with all of you in your different groupings to talk about how together we can build these groups in which you are, the capability and the staff capacity from which we're going to be building these things. But I understand there are some other questions. Oh, I saw one here. When will global directors be announced? As soon as we can, we can go through all the paperwork. It might be in tranches. We're going through a process with director generals now about their new responsibilities that will be added to their roles. And as soon as we've gone through that process where there's more than agreement in principle, there's an actual practical agreement on exactly what this looks like, we'll be able to share that. But the ones we're recruiting for may take a couple more weeks. I suspect we'll be able to say something very concrete in a matter of a few weeks, a matter of weeks now. But Claudia, there are some other questions, I understand.
So questions that we had received in advance, one which was important and asked by several colleagues was how HR-related policies might be harmonized and what implications that might have in terms of salary structures and benefits across the system.
Could I pass that one to Carla?
Thank you, Elwin. So last week, the task teams were launched, and the task teams within the HR community of practice. And there are like 10 teams working on work streams around culture, around job classification, compensation, policies, creating rewards, performance management, the list goes on. It's very exciting. And but as a cornerstone of this work is the policies, because it will set the boundaries on how we behave and how will that support the culture that we're aiming for. So part of this work will be prepared that these are goals, priorities, milestones within the time frame. And much of this work will also be interconnected and aligned to our destination. So, so the work has just begun. Thank you.
Thank you, Carla. No, this is a huge exercise. We'll be looking at what minimum is needed to be able to get to a live operating structure ready to support the science groups next year. And I really appreciate your work in that. And then there'll be a period of time through which we can develop much more full common HR policy across the CGIAR with common compensation approaches, really a one HR policy, which should make it a lot easier actually for staff to move around and have career opportunities that are part of a 10,000 organization, which should open up a whole bunch of possibilities for people to be part of a broader labor market. Claudia.
So Elwin, another really important cluster of questions that we've been receiving has been around job security. So perhaps you could speak to that for a moment, and then we have a more detailed question in the Q&A that Michael may be able to answer for us. Elwin, please.
Look, we completely understand the anxiety that happens in a transition like this. The point here is that none of this is about downsizing. This is about retaining and increasing our funding. In fact, if we hadn't done this, we would be downsizing pretty quickly because the funders have made it very clear how important this is to them. So what we have is a change process, which is about growing CGIAR to 2 billion. And we think that given the scale of work, our importance, the kind of credibility we're building, Kundavi can share just some of the wonderful stuff that's happening. We have Bill Gates out there, we're part of various communiques, we're winning all kinds of stuff. It's going well, and this will help us fundraise. So it's not about reducing staff, it's about making best use of the people we've got. And we felt that the way we were dividing ourselves up wasn't optimal. There were brilliant people, but somewhat boxed into the institutional structure that we had, which divided us up into 13 centers and alliances. So it's really about repositioning ourselves And in some cases, people might need to and be able to go deeper in a subject area and cover that subject area for the whole CGIAR, rather than just one center. So there might be some reskilling. Our working environment may change, but the objective here is not at all to downsize. It's to put ourselves together in a different way. We do hope, and I certainly do hope, that as we expand our funding, that we will be able to provide effective and efficient corporate services, to the extent that potentially the share of funding in an enhanced budget could go up in terms of the amount we spend on research vis-a-vis other costs. But let's see, we need to get on top of that. But this is not about downsizing, it's about retooling, it's about reorganizing, and it's about valuing the people we've got. Claudia, back to you. There may have been other questions.
Right, there were a couple of questions in the Q&A about this transition to financial management across the system, as well as questions about the potential for creating an ERP system that would be shared. And I thought perhaps, Ellen, if it's all right with you, that we ask Michael to speak to some of those questions, as he's been involved with those calls. Michael, please.
Yeah, thanks, Claudia. So answering for the first question about accountability and responsibility, what I think is important is that during fiscal year 2021, I mean, the centers will continue to have the responsibility for bilateral window 3, and ensuring that, you know, there's accountability and responsibilities for the costs associated with you know, the current center structure and the staff associated. Even though we go through this process of affiliation, that responsibility wouldn't necessarily change in fiscal year 2021. Now, as we move to fiscal year 2022, the idea is that then that accountability and responsibility will shift up to the new science groups. And so the science groups, which again, all, you know, the DDGs and all the science leaders across the system will be a part of, that would be then where the accountability and responsibilities for, you know, making sure that the bilateral projects are accomplished and the reports are turned in and we're hitting our targets, along with you know, everything else that kind of goes along with that. So hopefully that's clear. I mean, it is a moving, you know, we're moving and we're agile in how we're accomplishing this, but that's the vision. On the second part with the ERP, I think that yes, at some point in the future, we are going to need an ERP that is, you know, standardized and consistent across all the centers, because while many centers are utilizing OCS, there are other centers part of the 1CG who are using different systems. I think for all of our finance colleagues, and probably others know, implementing an ERP is not an easy process. It is somewhere between 12 to 15 months if we're lucky, potentially longer, you know, potentially longer. So it's going to be a process that we're going to start looking at probably at the end of 2021, maybe 2022. But the reality is we're going to do a good job of looking at our options and how do we move forward with it. Thanks.
If I may just very briefly, also that there's a leapfrogging of technologies around ERPs, where those big, heavy, expensive sort of mainframe systems are, it's, you know, I understand from my IT colleagues, we are able to leapfrog into cloud-based systems that are lighter and nimbler. And just a couple of other quick things on Oscar's question, just to emphasize, this structure will be from 2022 onwards, will be covering bilateral and pool. We believe we can do excellently on both, and Kundavai may be coming back to that. I just wanted to emphasize that. And the budget we'll be preparing will be a budget for the whole of CGIAR that's very much based on data provided by centers and collaborating with centers. So this is a major exercise to prepare that budget for next year. And the last thing I wanted to say is, given the amount of work involved, colleagues, anything we collectively can do to help you, anything you can do in your centers to try and try and cut back on any non-essential work involved, because we just know how much extra is being put on people this year. I've seen a few examples, I don't know, of a center developing a new HR policy right now, where I thought, well, actually, we're going to be, is that essential this year? Because we're going to be doing that collectively next year. So, you know, just we're here to help on that. We're here to support your DGs on that. And you know, please, if there's a way to pause anything non-essential so we can all focus, I think that would be brilliant for all of us. Back to you, Claudia.
Great. Well, thank you, Ellen, and a special thanks to Carla and Michael for joining the discussion today. And we'll shift now to a discussion of the research portfolio and the creation of the investment plan. I have 3 speakers joining me in this section today. Inga Jacobs-Mata, who is the country representative for South Africa at IMI, Hong Nguyen, who is the co-leader of animal and human health at ILRI, and Timothy Krupnik, who is cropping systems agronomist at CIMMYT based in Bangladesh. So I'm going to present 2 slides very quickly and then turn to my colleagues. This slide is really about the process and timeline of completion for the investment plan. So the investment plan, as you recall, is the 3-year portfolio of pooled funding that will help us to implement the research and innovation strategy. The research and innovation strategy is a 10-year vision delivered in 3-year investment plan. So this investment plan is under development, moving rapidly thanks to an enormous set of teams and contributions just across the system. This week, in fact, tomorrow, a first draft of the investment plan will go to the system board. It will then move to the System Council in June. The investment plan itself is a prospectus of concepts of some 36 CGIAR initiatives that will be approved for full development. Then each one will be reviewed by ISDC and be allocated funding. But this process that we're in right now is supported by investment advisory groups that include outside experts, regional representatives, funder representatives, supported by technical teams of CG scientists. Those investment advisory groups are looking at the action area level. If you remember, our action areas are system transformation, resilient agri-food systems, and genetic innovations. And then within those, each initiative has an initiative design team. So many of you are involved in these, but just to recall, each is led and co-led by CG scientists. And then those leads have put together teams of both internal and external scientists, stakeholders, and other partners. And we'll hear more about that. Those initiative designs are being put together into this investment plan, which is moving forward to the board and to the council. Next slide. This slide gives an early overview at a glance of the way the portfolio of pooled funded research is shaping up. On the left-hand side, you have our 5 impact areas that are part of the new research and innovation strategy. These are very ambitious, very explicitly ambitious impact areas that are the goal of the new strategy. The portfolio itself, the light colored band, is a band of regional integrated initiatives, which are very place-based oriented, impact-oriented initiatives that are looking at the prioritized challenges for smallholder farmers in those regions and bringing to bear all of CG's various capabilities and innovation bundles into those regional integrated initiatives. The band above that is the system transformation set of initiatives that are really looking at the meta level, at the economic, social, and resource systems in which food systems operate. So it's the food systems transformation space, looking at sort of that meta level. Below those regional initiatives are the resilient agri-food systems. Those 3 that are directly below are looking at mixed-use food systems. And then in the lower left-hand corner, more specific, thematic, and global agri-food systems. And on the bottom right-hand side are the genetic innovations activities that look at our breeding, they look at our gene banks, our seed systems, and importantly at new initiatives in terms of market intelligence and demand responsiveness of our work in that space. What's important, a couple of things that are very important about this slide is that the portfolio as a whole, this portfolio of pool funded initiatives is very much seen as an integrated whole that is delivering on the aspirations of the research and innovation strategy. So it is being framed by the theory of change for the whole of the portfolio, theories of change at the action area level and at the initiative level. So there's a cascading logic to why we're doing what we're doing and how altogether it will have an impact that is greater than the sum of the parts. These theories of change will also help us to draw insights and capacities across the different initiatives, across the action areas, science groups, and hope to bring us all together. The other important issue to flag here is that to our best projections, we look to be in a very strong position to maintain at least the current level or volume of funding that we enjoy now under the CRPs in window 1-2 into this new portfolio. Ideally more, and Kundavi will be speaking to that, but we don't therefore expect any sort of a financial funding cliff in our research. We expect to move strongly into this portfolio from the CRPs in terms of volume and in terms of allocation and sequencing. The development and sequencing of this portfolio is also being done very mindful of business continuity and ensuring that we bring with us all of our strengths into the new portfolio and into the one CGIAR. We also have, I think, an exciting idea in June to have a transfer marketplace where science leaders can get together and make sure that specific intellectual assets and ongoing bits of work that are exciting, they've been talking a lot about golden eggs, that those are seen and placed into the new constellation of work wherever appropriate. But let me turn now to three of our colleagues who have been very deeply involved in the development of this portfolio, both to introduce themselves and to talk a little bit about their experience in the way the portfolio of pooled funding is being developed, how they're working across different centers and programs, and the interesting and exciting aspects they may be able to share with us. So let me turn first to Inga Jacobs-Mata, who again is our country representative in South Africa from IMI. Inga, please.
Many thanks, Claudia, and good morning, or was it good afternoon and good evening to the colleagues joining this call. It's really great to hear of all the developments so far. As Claudia mentioned, my name is Inga Jacobs-Mata. I represent IMI in Southern Africa, based in Pretoria in South Africa, and I also lead the East and Southern Africa Regional Integrated Initiative, along with co-lead Evan Gervets from the Alliance. My background is in water governance, but increasingly working in all aspects of environmental governance at different scales.
Thank you, Inga. Maybe we'll go on then and to Hung Nguyen, who is animal and animal and human health at ILRI. Please.
Yes, good morning, afternoon, evening from Nairobi. I'm co-leading the animal and human health program at INRI now in Nairobi, but I was previously regional rep for INRI in East and Southeast Asia. In the same time, I'm working for A4NH CRP at the moment, leading flagship food safety and involved in the CGIAR COVID hub. Very good to talking with you. Yeah.
Wonderful, thank you. And Timothy Krupnik.
Thanks.
CIMMYT.
Yes, thanks very much. I'm Tim Krupnik, and I'm a systems agronomist with CIMMYT, and I also serve as CIMMYT's country representative in Bangladesh, but lead a few projects that are part of a larger portfolio of bilaterals that have been invested in the CGIAR over time that are really cross-CGIAR programs, such as the Cereal Systems Initiative for South Asia, that have for over 10 years now worked to put together the efforts of IRI, CIMMYT, IMI, IFPRI, and also at times working closely with World Fish and ILRI across the whole of the South Asia region. So that partnership and those teams that we have built upon have become the foundational building blocks for the South Asia regional initiative that we're working on developing at this point in time.
Great, thank you. Well, maybe I can ask all three of you to help me to answer some of the questions that have been coming in, both before and as we speak now. And you've touched a bit on this, each of you, but one of the questions that has just come in on the Q&A is about on these initiatives, when are we going to have a clear indication on the way forward and next steps? And how is interaction with national partners going to be coordinated? So on the next steps, let me answer, and then I'll turn to you on how you are working specifically in your initiatives with national partners. So the next steps really are to, we are consolidating the investment plan, which includes those theories of change and the overarching framework for how all the initiatives fit together, as well as the pre-concept stage outlines of each one of the initiatives specifically. Those are being moved forward to the system board and then the system council for their clearance and endorsement. And that endorsement and clearance is to develop the full proposals with the expectation that over the course of the calendar year, the full proposals will be developed and the majority of them will be ready for launch January 1st, 2022. The portfolio as a whole, though, will be financed and implemented. So those that aren't quite ready yet, because different initiatives are at different levels of readiness coming into the process, need different levels of consultation, very importantly, those will roll in after. We expect in the first maybe 2 to 3 quarters of 2022. So this isn't a very long rolling period, but it's a pragmatic rolling period as we move forward. Again, that sequencing is being designed quite mindful of business continuity. We intend to bring everyone with us strongly into the new CG. But in terms of moving forward with these consultations and working directly with national partners, let me turn back to our speakers. Perhaps we'll move in the same order as well if Inga, if you have something to share on this.
Sure. Thanks, Claudia, and thanks for the question. A really important one, and an important one for me, working in the region, living in the region. We've already started to engage national partners in the Eastern Southern Africa Regional Initiative. I guess we were lucky in a way, we started our process building from the 2-degree initiative, Southern Africa Challenge, which was a really intense stakeholder engagement process that we ran last year. We engaged with over 300 stakeholders, and we had just under 20 virtual engagement sessions, national consultations, private sector roundtables, thematic focus sessions, and really I would say, many national partners have already been engaged, but of course, now with this regional initiative, it's not just Southern Africa, so it's moved now, it's expanded its scope to East Africa. And really, we need to start that engagement again. For us, the important thing moving into the full concept phase, it's going to be quite an intense stakeholder engagement process as well, and we look forward to that. We also hope to, we set up these design teams initially to help us with the pre-concept, and that was really great. It was CG partners, experts in their fields, but also regional and national partners on that team helping us craft the pre-concept. Of course, now moving forward, and also in an effort to be inclusive, I mean, Eastern Southern Africa is a huge region. We're thinking about developing working groups where we will look to, national partners, regional partners, other CG partners that perhaps have not been in the design team to help us craft the next step. Thank you, Claudia.
Great. It's wonderful just to see the level of engagement and thought and recognition of how essential it is if we want to have impact to have this consistent and very mindful engagement. Hong, would you like to speak to this?
Yes, actually, our initiative is all about One Health. We want to protect the human health through a One Health approach. It means that you need to bring the agriculture sectors, in particular the animal health, together with public health and the environment. That is the whole idea. And actually, we are building on the work that we have been doing for the last 2 phases of CRP, A4NH. And just to be clear from the beginning, at the moment, we have not consulted yet any partners from country and region as we involving a process of the initiative development. However, actually, we have an idea and identify what would be the partners and the country we would be working with them through the development of the initiative, through the consultation process. I would say that will take on very soon. And also through the participation of different centers. So our IDT, we have only 10 members, 60% from CG and 40% from external partnership. And through this CG center and partners, we identify the country and the partners, mainly from university or development partners, and in particular, national and government in different countries to work to develop this in the next phase of initiative development. So in short, I think that we have an idea with whom we will talk, we will work, but that will come up in the next phase of development.
Great, thank you, Hamad. And it's true, we need to be very pragmatic in defining issue areas with the consultation with outside experts, and then moving toward partners. So each initiative has its own mindful structure of how and when and whom to engage. Before turning to Tim, we actually have another question in the Q&A, an on-camera request from Carlo Fata that does relate to the regional integrated initiatives, which is what Tim is involved in, Inge as well. But if we can, let's see, this is a new tech structure, if we can bring Carlo Fata on camera.
Yes. Oh, sorry, it's really dark. Let me.
We see you. Welcome.
You see you.
Thank
Well.
you. I'm in a duty station in the duty travel in a hotel. Yeah, thanks a lot. I mean, really, because I think this is really an important point. I'm Carlo Fata. I work for the Alliance of Biodiversity in SIAT as a director for biodiversity for food and agriculture research area, and I was leading the initiative on nature positive agriculture together with Josiane Nichiane from IMI. So my question really is, I mean, as you know, there was, that's why I asked to go on camera to elaborate a little bit further. I mean, there has been already some criticism that this process of one CGIAR is very top down, is not consulting enough. And so it's really important that as we move into further development of the initiative, that really we go into the partners. But then, of course, and particularly the national programs and national governments, etc. But then, of course, the risk is that there are 25 initiatives that will go individually to countries that seems to be, I mean, a lot of people want to work in Ethiopia and Kenya and in other countries. And so we could create a lot of traffic jams as we try individually to move and to go and consult with those partners. So my question really was, should we do it through, for example, INGA for Southern and East Africa, so through the regional initiative? Will there be a kind of coordinating mechanism that would avoid those traffic jam? I mean, what are the reflection, if any, if this has been already kind of thought? That was really my question. Thanks.
Right, so you touched also on a larger question, Carlo, about engagement with our host countries in the entire reform process, which is something that Kundavi may speak to in the next section as well. Because the consultation process in a reform as ambitious as ours is complicated and is needed at so many levels and in so many ways. But let me turn first to Tim for some of his thoughts in regional integrated initiative development consultation, and then back to Inga perhaps for a last word on this section. Tim.
And I might try to answer a bit of both of those questions, because I think they're really relevant. I mean, for the CGIAR, and as a scientist that's been based within the regions working for over 10 years, when you're in regions and with you're in countries, you know that this is where the magic of the CGIAR occurs. The impact of the CGIAR and all of our work happens directly in responding to our partners as clients and co-creating and working very strongly with them on all of the research agendas that we have, and assuring that research can be moved through a continuum into impact within countries and regional contexts. So we've had that in mind as we've developed the South Asia Regional Initiative. And I guess we are somehow privileged and lucky because we are building on a history of initiatives and work where we've worked very closely and are in daily constant contact with our partners and work very closely with them already through existing bilaterals and aspects of the CRPs that have been functioning already within the region. So we're well positioned as far as that goes. For the development of the initiatives themselves, we've been put on a very quick timeline, but we were able to form a really good cross-CGIAR core group that was working on the initiatives. We're very proud that the scientists that were involved in developing the South Asia Initiative were primarily scientists that are nationals from the region, based within the region, very passionate about the region, and also bringing in donors and core partners from larger NGOs and think tanks and other organizations that are very relevant for the initiative. In addition to that, we've had a larger advisory group that we have engaged with and gotten regular feedback on the work that we've been putting together. And those include leveraging regional organizations like the South Asian Regional Center for Agriculture, which is a cross-governmental organization that works on advising around policy and extension and research within the region. So we're pulling in consultation in the way that we already can as a function of how we are already engaging and working with our partners within the region. But in terms of next steps, and I think that's where the last question was very relevant, is that the regional initiatives, I think in many ways serve very well to help couple and put together the work of the global thematic and science group initiatives to help transition their work very quickly and somewhat seamlessly into impact because of those partnerships that we have in place and because of the networks that we have already built over the years. So we are very excited and interested to help in that process, but also to assure that the work that we do at a global level, the development of methods, the development of key research tools, the genetic innovations, do also respond to the needs of our national and regional partners that we're in touch with on a regular basis. So we see our role as helping to facilitate to some extent those exchanges and helping to facilitate and assure the impact of the CGIAR as we move forward. And that's, of course, something that will be done, and I think Kundavi will speak about this, in consultation with the regional directors as that system develops and country directors as that system develops as well. But I think that we're well placed because we're already working forwards and doing a lot of this work in practice to try to align the CGIAR as we move forwards with our regional and national needs, because once again, that's where the magic happens. This is where the impact occurs, and that's why it's so great to be based within the regions and countries. Thanks.
Thanks, Tim. That's such an important connection, this idea that the regional initiatives can essentially uptake and implement so many and adapt so many of the global and thematic innovations that we create. So we're just a minute over time for this segment, but I did ask that Inga say a word as well about the South Asia partnership. If you could give us a quick minute in that regard and then move forward. Thanks, Inga.
Sure, Claudia. I mean, you know, Timothy said it well, but I think Carlo's point is a really crucial one for us in the next step. You know, in the lead and co-lead cohort, we've been talking about what are those linkages, the synergies between the global initiatives and the regional initiatives. And I think a lot of that needs to be unpacked in the next phase. Us in the East and Southern Africa initiative, we also spoke about, at least with some of the global initiative leads, how we plan to coordinate our stakeholder engagement. You know, so sort of linking the engagement happening in the global initiatives that need to happen anyway, you know, in East and Southern Africa. And we know that, you know, the CG has such strength in this region. A lot of concentration of effort in countries like Kenya, in Ethiopia. And so, yeah, we need to coordinate our efforts there. And so I think in the full concept phase, we really are going to have to tackle that. Thanks, Claudia.
Great. Thanks to you, Inga. Hong, Tim, thank you so much for joining and speaking with us today. And I think that this is a very natural segue to move then to Kundavi to talk to us really about our global engagement and outreach. This is such an exciting aspect of 1CG, this ability to raise our voice as one massive and influential network. So over to you, Kundavi, please.
Thank you very much, Claudia. I'm really happy to share some highlights on what's happening at Global Engagement and Innovation. And I'm also joined by Julie, Director, Partnership and Knowledge Management at TIMI. and Tunis from Director of Business Development and External Relations at IFPRI. So great to have these two colleagues as well at this segment of the presentation. Just some highlights. One is we heard a lot from Elvin on all that's happening in terms of our institutional reforms that are underway, and Claudia on the initiatives, the investment plan. So to advance all this, we certainly need a lot going on in terms of the resource mobilization, a much more stronger partnership and engagement. Again, these are things that were quite much highlighted in the new research and innovation strategy. So I wanted to share with you all a few things that are happening. One is on the funding, and that's something that we really are concerned about. Everybody I can see. Do we have enough resources to really carry through not only in this transition, but moving into this 1CG? And if you look at the larger vision of the 1CGIAR, it is, we have put up an ambition of 2 billion by 2030 of both bilateral and pooled funding annually. So in that sense, we are really working towards that, using that Rmca strategy that was prepared as our guiding document, and really putting all our efforts to achieve that target. And the first order of business has been to really get the pooled funding to support the investment plan that Claudia was talking about for the 2022-24 business cycle. So the last few months has been largely to ensure that can we get that pooled funding behind. Based on all our work with working very closely with the funders, we still feel that we can really achieve a baseline target of 1 billion for that for the 2022-24 period, and in a high case scenario, even going up all the way to 1.4 billion. So that's still where we are at. And again, this is being monitored, assessed very carefully. So as the funder situation change, we really have a much more clear understanding of where we stand. Similarly, one of the major focus for us was also for the elevation of the food and land and water systems research and innovation in the global platforms, in all the dialogues that are happening. This year is a fantastic year. There's so much happening in the global stage. You have the UN food systems and the COP26 coming in the remaining part of the year. But the year started out in January with the Global Adaptation Summit. And that's where we had our new research and innovation strategy, and building on that, there's a lot more serious commitment coming on the research and innovation agenda. I think just today I heard from Andre, who was giving us the message that the G7, this is our director for funders and external engagement system office, sharing the news that the G7 communique, they have explicitly mentioned CGIAR along with other national agriculture research system, the multi-stakeholder, the global public research system like CGIAR will need to be supported strongly in the area of research and innovation. And that's a real exciting message to hear. And similarly, a conversation going on with the G20 as well. So we see this enhanced and much more unified 1CG voice really bring the food and land and water systems research and innovation in a much more serious way in the global dialogue as well. And that's what we want to really enhance further. Now, as part of that, there's also a lot of seriousness in terms of translating our engagement at the country and the regional stakeholders as well. A lot of comments that we get in the from staff and also from our external players is, what are we doing with respect to national and national agriculture research system and country systems? And that's something that I will also explain a bit further. Now, in the transition, and that's the right side of the slide, if you see, there are certain things we really want to give urgent attention to, and that is in terms of the funding. And I mentioned to you about the pooled funding. One area that I really want us to keep our focus is bilateral funding. And the message to all of us is, let's keep our eye on the ball in terms of ensuring that the bilateral funding that centers are really focused on, that needs to continue, and we shouldn't pause a bit. So let's ensure that the bilateral funding continues. So pooled and bilateral funding are both important for us. Now, what was important is also to ensure what is the bilateral funding potential and the possibilities in the center we don't have a handle on. And that's where we need to get a much better understanding of it. And my colleagues will talk about it a bit more. But one of the main focus for us right now in the transition would be to build a unified 1CGIAR pipeline that includes both pooled and bilateral funding, and that we also have a good understanding of where we stand on each one of them and where we can do much more dedicated work to drive that. So we will have a much clearer path moving forward. So that's where we really are committed to the 1CGIAR pipeline. The other aspect is also in terms of the diversification of funding. And that's something that we really need to, not just the System Council funders. And there are 4 other areas of funding potentials we need to look at, and that will be in the area of IFIs, the investment climate, particularly in the climate finance area, the private investors, as well as the emerging markets. And here again, you'll hear more from our colleagues who will share some thoughts what work is already ongoing. Again, a lot going on in terms of building our partnership. And partnership, as you can see, is one of the important focus of the new strategy. So we have opened a dialogue at a high level with the African Union Commission, similarly with the Rome-based agency, each one of them, and that will be a lot more going on in terms of high-level, strong partnership to build the kind of scaling up and impact that we have actually highlighted as part of our new strategy as well. Similarly, national and regional agriculture systems, the network of agriculture research systems. We have already a conversation going on with FARA in Africa, as well as APARI in Asia. So in that sense, to be also be well aligned, and how do you use this network of players to be much more grounded and aligned to the work in the regions as well. Again, there is the operating structure. There will be a resource mobilization, communication, and advocacy team at the global level, but well coordinated also by a similar team in the regions, as well as in the science group. And they will be all seamlessly working together. And what and how of that is actually will be an area of work that we will continue to develop in the coming months, so that there's much more continuity and coordination among the RMCA teams sitting across the system as well. The new operating structure has put quite a lot of emphasis in terms of more regional and country presence. And that's where we will see the kind of things that we heard that Tim was talking about. How do we deepen the engagement of national partners, going beyond the national agriculture research system, so much happening among the private sector and other partners, so that the global initiators and the investment plan, the regional initiators, we are also bringing the voices of the national system, and the regional directors and the country managers who will be coming into us representing the 1CG will be able to have a much more coordinated engagement, developing a country framework so that we are responding to the needs of the country as well. Just one last bit on the brand. I know there's a lot of interest in that. And again, the new name for the 1CG, the survey is already underway, as you have all heard about it. We will be shortlisting this and then coming to you all back before we finalize the new name and the new brand. And the plan is to launch it sometime early next year. Again, want to emphasize that we will build and leverage strong center brands. And how do we have both the new brand as well as the center brand thrive? And that as doing it in a more strategic and smart manner, that's also part of the work that is planned during the transition as well. Let me now invite my two colleagues who will speak a bit more on the task team that is right now working on bringing about better coordination as well as working on the diversification of the funding source. With that, Tunis, and can I ask both of you, Julie, to comment?
I will start.
Oh, Julie, go ahead.
So thank you very much, Kunavi, for all that, the explanation of how we're working in this space. And indeed, it is a very dynamic space, and there's a lot going on, and there has to be a lot going on. So because to deliver these overarching priorities for global engagement and innovation, there is a lot of work to be done, in particular around resource mobilization, but also under communication and advocacy. So as Kunavi mentioned, we have this task team, and we are also having or setting up transition task teams to move forward with critical path activities to deliver a unified resource mobilization, communication, and advocacy during the transition in particular. And the resource mobilization, the RMCA task team has been working together for over a year, actually. And so it consists of representatives from across the system. And the first task was to develop the Rmca strategy last year, and now this is further moving forward to start implementation of this Rmca strategy. We've also added communications capacities to these groups, and they are supporting the 5 action areas, which Tunis will speak to in a minute. We've now also developed, we're working on establishing transition task teams, so TTTs with more, even another T added. And staff from the communities of practice are being invited to join those. So for example, one is around building the unified pipeline, which Kunavi just mentioned, and to have a better grasp of what we're doing in terms of pooled and bilateral funding. And likewise, there is one around communications that is being set up, and one around advocacy. And we're also looking at developing processes and mechanisms that will enable us to coordinate and maintain our continuity in resource mobilization in the transition, which is, as Kunavi already noted, extremely important. So these transition task teams are being developed, and all these teams are working together with the Resource Mobilization COP and the Communications COP. And so I'm now going to hand over to my colleague Tunis, who will explain more about the 5 task teams. Tunis, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Good. Thank you very much, Julie. Colleagues, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. To meet the 1 CGIAR ambitions of 2 billion annual by 2030, we have developed an RMCA strategy that will enable us to grow and diversify funding across 5 different action areas. The strategy is well positioned in the new organizational structure, and we are developing early pipelines for each of the action areas. This also means that for each of the action areas, we have set preliminary fundraising targets, and we will aim to prioritize for action area 1, delivering commitments from the System Council funders for the research initiatives. Very important. For action area 2, opening up CGIAR to new funder markets, and then aligning investments to the CGIAR research and innovation strategy. For action area 3, and you can see them on your screen, building a pipeline for the Green Climate Fund through the CGIAR accreditation, which is in its final stages. For action area 4, changing the way that we think about investments at country level. So bringing together national programs, funders, and international finance institutions. For action area 5, catching up on private investments and high net worth philanthropy. The next step, now that we have this RMCA strategy, is to really translate the strategy into specific action plans, set more specific targets, and build system-wide opportunities for 2022 and beyond. The task team that has been working on this has identified for each of these action areas 2 individuals that will be focal persons to really develop and make sure that these action areas deliver the resources that we anticipate. I have been part of this task team for over a year, as Julie mentioned, that we have been working together for over a year now, very intensely. And I have to say, it's really a pleasure to work in a cross-system task team and really join hands and to see how we can move this strategy forward and really start with the implementation. Thank you very much for listening to me, and I look forward to the discussion.
Kundavi, perhaps I can jump in and ask you some of the questions, you and your colleagues, some of the questions that we received beforehand, before this session. In particular, there were several colleagues who asked what sort of funding outlook we have for 2022, particularly in view of the closure of the CRPs and the shifting funding priorities as a result of COVID-19. Now, I know that you touched on much of this in your overview, but it is an enduring concern. So maybe you could specifically speak to that now.
Yeah, I just wanted to really highlight how important this funding, particularly in this transition, is, and that's why we have been really focused in terms of working very closely with our funders. The 5 large funders are Gates, the US, the World Bank, Germany, and Netherlands. And then you have a number of other funders as well, both in terms of understanding what their priorities are, what do they want to see in terms of our own work, the quality, and that's where Claudia was talking about. The funders are very closely engaged in the development of the initiatives. So they see what are the big priority areas that they are much aligned to their priorities as well. So in that sense, a very close engagement. And also the numbers that we have looked at by funders are also based on what their funding plans for the coming years. So it's based on a very careful, systematic understanding of what funders are wanting to put their funds on and what their allocations in their own national budgets are, and based on which we have put those numbers of 1 to 1.4 billion. The main focus right now is to get the investment plan, the portfolio, high quality one developed so that they have confidence and the comfort that they really can put that funding for the 2022-24. So from what we are hearing from the funders is get the portfolio, get in the investment plan, make sure they are aligned to the global priorities, and are they also aligned very closely to national priorities as well, and ensuring that they are well consulted at different levels. So our sense is based on the discussion so far. The second half of the year, we are expecting in these global events, either the UN Food System Summit or the COP26, many of these large funders would be able to make a more formal commitment. And the next coming months are therefore very critical in terms of ensuring that we get our portfolio right, and also that we have a high quality set of things to be taking forward. So in a sense, that's where in the immediate pool funding is. Similarly, what you heard from Tunis and Julia is what are the things that we are doing in the other action areas. So let's not put everything on the System Council alone. We will be building up that pipeline and all this areas of bilateral funding in those 4 additional action areas. So in the coming months, maybe 12 months from now, we would be in much stronger position in terms of a number of other areas also in the fundraising. So overall, we feel this one CGIAR pipeline will also allow us to get a good understanding. So when you be able to see very soon what's the sort of a funding that we are looking at by funders with pooled and bilateral, so that all of us can see. So it's not just be a few of us talking about it, but all of us can see in the system put in the database as well.
Great. So we just have a couple more minutes in this section, and I'm not sure, Kundavi, if you'd like to turn back to your colleagues. One of the other, I think, important questions that has come up in the Q&A is a question around country representatives. We know that we have multiple country representatives for different centers in different countries, but one of the really exciting opportunities with one CGIAR is to be able to speak loudly and with one voice. So I'm wondering if you might want to comment on that, or invite your colleagues to join in again. Thanks.
Okay, let me just quickly, because this is another area where people are interested. The regional directors are coming on board, so that's a part of the new leadership team. We'll have 6 regional directors, and one of their priority areas of work is to look at the capacity, the skills, the assets in the region, and what do they see as the CGIAR's strategic engagement and framework. And based on that, we really want to make sure that there will be very strong one CG presence and engagement. As part of that, in the countries, they'll be representing all of one CGIAR, a country representative. Some of the strategic countries, the appointment of that will be happening in the second half of the year through a competitive process. And once that is in place, we would see a more coordinated country presence of CGIAR, and also in the dialogue and engagement at the country level happening through the country managers as well. Again, part of the tool that they will have is developing a country framework, which would be done closely with the government and the national partners. So we have a one comprehensive strategic framework that can be used as the basis for one CG support in the country as well. So that's basically the big strategic thinking and the operational structure to support that as well. Tunis and Julie, please jump in on the other aspects if it is not relating to country or region, but also on the funding, because I'm sure a lot of it you guys are also working on them.
I'd be happy to say a few words on the funding. I think you've elaborated indeed very well on the pooled funding and how we're going about that. But on the bilateral funding more generally, I think it is important to realize that if we are the size of organization that we are becoming, it will be much easier for us to come to agreements with major funders. For example, the EU looking at a framework contract, or like we're trying to access the GCF funding now, or JEF funding. So these are all the type of things that as single institutes is very difficult to do, but as a much larger organization, we can come to better agreements and overall framework contracts. So it is really, these are major fundraising opportunities which we're going to tap into.
I would just like to add to this that in the background, we have already done a lot of work for emerging markets, for example, to explore how we can best position ourselves and how we can best make use of the opportunities that are growing there. There's been a big study commissioned by the Gates Foundation, for example, to look at how China will in the future will engage with the CGIAR. And so there's a lot of very exciting things developing in that area also. Thank you.
Great, then maybe what we'll need to do is first let me, I'm sure Kundavi would have, but I've jumped right in. A great thanks to Tunis and to Julie. In the interest of time, because we have had so many good questions put forward in the Q&A, we thought we'd take a little bit of a rapid round of the EMT to answer some of the continuing outstanding questions in the Q&A before winding down today's discussion. Maybe I will turn first to Elwyn to pick up on any of the questions that you see remaining. I see there are 2 that I'd like to speak to, and I'm sure Kundavi has 1 or 2 she would like to. Please, Elwyn.
Really quick, because I'm looking at the clock. There were 3 that I really wanted to say something about. Nilantha, great question on what's the DG's authority over staff. in this model. I wouldn't call it a centralized model. Remember, we are not centralizing. We're actually going to be delegating a lot of decision making, but in this model. And the answer is that we have brilliant DGs, in my view, but they were organized and their authorities were organized around the previous center structure, which didn't really fit the research strategy. So we developed an operational structure, and those DGs are filling roles in that operational structure as well. And that's where the operational authority will lie over staff decision making, where we hire more staff, how we spend money. So it is a real transition, and that will be a big change. There will still be significant roles for the DGs in terms of engaging for the DG role, which will involve, of course, engaging with host countries, being someone on site if there's a particular event where they need to gather people from different groups together. But the key aspect of authority over the bulk of what we do will be from the operational structure. And that's why we're so happy those DGs are playing these roles in the operational structure. Secondly, Victoria, how is one CGIAR encouraging inter-center sharing instead of rivalry between individual centers? Hope throughout this discussion, we're conveying that we're creating essentially operationally one organization with all kinds of fantastic branches of it that are designed to work together. So there will not be 11 or 12 different of everything. We'll have one, for example, HR group that's supporting the whole system. So it won't be a question of sharing best practice in HR and our policies. We will have one policy and one group doing that, and the same for our other services and the way we do business. So it's a really different model than the one we had, which we think builds on the brilliant people we've got. Third question, there was a question of how will we receive funds in this new system. Couple of points here. The existing legal architecture, we'll use that to receive our money. We have trust fund in the World Bank. We have center accounts with system organization accounts to receive bilateral grants. But the way we'll program that money will be using the operational structure, the decision making for how we program those funds, how we manage them, how we manage the overhead in terms of where that funding goes, which parts of the system require that budget will be done according to the operational structure. So that's why we need this good run-in of 8 months to prepare for that new budget system, the new budgeting approach at the end of this year. Back to you, Claudia. I think you're muted, Claudia. Yeah.
You would think that I would have learned after 1.5 years of this lifestyle. I apologize. We've come really to the end of our time. So let me move to the final slide or two, with noting that this is an ongoing conversation, and the questions that you're asking me today, we will continue in this dialogue. We are looking, as you can see on the screen, for different ways in which to ensure we have a really robust communication with all staff as we move into these transitional periods. So on this slide here is a reminder of the various ways that we hope to be communicating with you during the transition and seeking your feedback, which is really very important. And in terms of seeking feedback, let us take one final poll. Again, we do this with you at the end of the different webinars, just to make sure that we target our time, use our time effectively when we meet again in a month. So please log on to menti.com. This is the code is on your screen as well. Put in the code and then let us know, with a view to our future webinars and communications, what are the areas that you would like us in particular to focus on. And while you are all doing that and the answers are popping up, let me just thank everyone so much for engaging today, for the excellent questions. I want to thank in particular our tremendous set of speakers, Carla and Michael, Inga, Hung and Tim, Julie and Tunis, for adding a real depth of information and new perspectives and different voices to the transition that we're all moving through together and trying to update. Let me remind you that following today's webinar, you will be receiving a short survey just to get your feedback so that we can we can really target our efforts in the future. And as a reminder, there will be a recording of this session made available on cgiar.org in the coming days. Please do share it with any colleagues who may not have been able to attend today. So we're looking at this word cloud forming some very important issues about operational policies and staff alignment, some exciting thoughts like the new branding and the new initiatives. These are all issues that we will be working forward together, and we very much look forward to that. We, on behalf of the MT, very much look forward to that. So we will leave you with these thoughts, mindful of your time, closing down this as promised on time, and thanking you just very much again for all of your engagement. We look forward to keeping in touch and to seeing you again next month. So thanks to everyone, and bye-bye.